All Bubu's friends call me Kakima.
Yeah? Is that right? Is that what you call her too, Rahul?
No.
Why not?
Well, because she's not my uncle's wife.
I always found it exciting that there was a film that was my namesake, Parama. But it took me years to get to this Aparna Sen classic. When I finally did, I found that it had many similarities with a newer Aparna Sen film, Goynar Baksho. In most ways, Parama and Goynar Baksho are very different films when it comes to tone, story, and even cinematography. But what's common between them is the character of Pishima. Pishima, or paternal aunt in Bangla, is a widow in both films. And not just any widow, but a widow from a time gone by when widows weren't allowed to have long hair, had to wear white saris, eat bland food, and even live separately from the rest of the family. While Pishima has a major role in Goynar Baksho, she is merely a side note in Parama, and yet incredibly relevant. What's common between both Pishima characters is their representation of the deprived woman. A widow in this context isn't just deprived of the finer things like good food and clothing, but also things like her sexual autonomy, property, and even her identity as a human being. Property includes the beautiful long hair that Pishima had as a young bride, which was an expression of her womanhood. While in Goynar Baksho, Pishima holds a position of power in the household through the sheer might of her jewelry box, the only property she as a woman is allowed to own. Shudha Pishi in Parama owns nothing and has apparently been driven to madness by her circumstances. But Pishima isn't the main character. In fact, her very existence is dependent on the protagonist, who is a married woman, Parama and Shomlata. I say that Pishima's existence depends on them because in Parama, Shudha Pishi only exists in Parama's memory and has largely been forgotten by the world. Similarly, in Goynar Baksho, Pishima dies at the very beginning but refuses to leave the mortal plane where her jewelry box is, and the only one who can see her is Shomlata. Parama and Shomlata initially represent everything that Shudha Pishi and Pishima are not. Married, domesticated, the ideal demure housewife who doesn't question her husband and quietly performs her duty. But over the course of the films, a gradual change comes over the housewife. The films are about this very journey. But to understand how the housewife goes from her defined role to that of a liberated or even an immoral woman, we must break down the characteristics of the widow and understand what makes Pishima who she is. The first way we see Pishima is that she is a widow who is a financial burden. At a time when a woman's identity and sustenance is tied to her husband, the widow becomes a financial burden on the family. Take note that any possibility of her rising from this situation is destroyed as she is physically labeled as a permanent widow with her white sari and short hair. The ultimate goal is to remove the widow from the household, since without a man to serve, she holds no value as a human being. What's interesting is that the inverse of the widow, the housewife, also has no financial independence. She is taken care of by her husband in exchange for performing her duties as a housewife. That's where the other aspect of both Pishima and the housewife comes in. Neither of the two have an identity beyond their relationship to the family. And finally, Pishima is deprived of her sexual autonomy. This is the main reason why she feels jealous of the housewife who has a sexual partner. Overall, Pishima's fate serves as a warning to the housewife to release herself from familial shackles before things get worse. In releasing both these women from their shackles is where both films take different approaches. In Goynar Baksho, Shomlata realizes that the family she has married into is quickly losing money.
অন্য সংস্থান যে আমি বা দাদা কেউই করি না, এটা তো বুঝতেই পারতাছো, বাপেও না। আমাগো বংশে পুরুষরা কখনো পরের গোলামি করে নাই। আমরা হইলাম গিয়া জমিনদার, যারে কয় ল্যান্ডলর্ড, বুঝছো?
Realizing that the men of the house are quite useless, Shomlata takes matters into her own hands. Interestingly, she does this by taking a loan against jewelry from the dead Pishima's jewelry box. Now it's important to note here that Pishima has entrusted Somlata with the box not just because she seemed like a timid woman who would be easy to dominate, but also because she knew that coming from a poor household, Somlata would understand the value of the jewelry box. Pishima views the jewelry box as an emergency fund for some extraordinary situation that hasn't arrived yet. But Somlata sees the investment potential of it without having broken her promise to never wear or sell any of Pishima's jewelry. Somlata takes the first step towards liberation on her own by displaying her entrepreneurial skills. As for Paroma, she is happy leading the predictable life of a housewife until a much younger Rahul comes along. What Rahul says about Paroma and her name is important to both films.
আচ্ছা পরমা, আপনি কি করেন সারাদিন? কি ভাবেন?
This is the first time someone has acknowledged Paroma's value as a human being with a name. Similarly, in Goynar Baksho, Pishima's anger at Somlata is diluted when Somlata returns the jewelry she had taken and names her store after Pishima. Just as Somlata immortalizes Rashmoni's name, later in the film, her own name is immortalized, but we will get to that in a bit. Coming back to Paroma, her strange friendship with Rahul takes her outside of her home to places in her city that she had never seen before. Rahul unlocks the lost parts of Paroma: poetry, music, and her childhood, a childhood that witnessed the plight of Shudha Pishi. Paroma connects her memory of Shudha Pishi and her childhood to a plant, the name of which she cannot remember. At this point, Paroma has formed a connection with Rahul which she can no longer deny. Having liberated themselves financially and sexually, Somlata and Paroma respectively have got targets on their backs. Somlata's in-laws begin to question how she was able to manage the capital for a business. But it isn't a difficult situation to deal with thanks to Pishima. Pishima's voice echoes the names of mistresses and the vices that the men of the house hide. This is an important part of the film that will be highlighted later. As for Paroma, the consequences of her actions are much greater. She is ostracized by her family, that includes her husband who ironically made a pass at his colleague in his wife's absence, and her feminist daughter who looked down on her mother's backward values but couldn't forgive her for having an affair. Paroma is driven to taking her own life, but survives with a deep head injury. Suddenly, the decorated woman of the house with beautiful long hair has been turned into a mad woman who begins to resemble Shudha Pishi without her locks. Here, the man's position in the whole ordeal is never questioned. Rahul seems to have run off to a foreign land with no consequences. Similarly, in Goynar Baksho, Pishima points out that while the men of the house break the sanctity of marriage with other women, she wasn't allowed to have the affections of a man. She encourages Somlata to have an affair with Rafiq, the man who follows her from a distance. But unlike Paroma, Somlata resists the temptation, probably because Somlata's life has a lot more with a business and a household, and she doesn't need the affections of a man, though she craves it. While these women of the past struggle with their marriages and identities, our attention turns towards their daughters. Both Paroma and Somlata's daughters are progressive thinkers and in some ways don't respect the lives their mothers have led and the struggles they have dealt with. This is portrayed by Somlata's daughter Choitali when she turns away the jewelry box, criticizing the jewelry for being dated and tacky, disregarding its value. The daughters don't recognize that they have gained their independence on the backs of their mother's sacrifices. Choitali only truly acknowledges both her mother and Pishima as complete people when she learns the true value of the jewelry box and finds Rafiq's poetry dedicated to her mother. In his poetry, Somlata's name is immortalized. Paroma's daughter too realizes how unfair she has been to her mother when she notices her isolated from the rest of the family at the hospital, demanding to go out and earn her own money. She rejoices with Paroma as she finally remembers the name of the plant from her childhood. This symbolizes that finally Paroma has got back her identity, which got lost along the way when she grew into a woman. At the end, both films portray 3 generations of women asserting their right to love, to work, to own property, and to have an identity beyond just Ma, Bodhi, Kakima, and Pishima. Thank you guys so much for watching. Keep watching for more videos. Subscribe to my channel. Like this video if you liked it. And please share it and leave a comment. Tell me what you think. And I'll see you next time. Bye.